Well, I think I'd suggest that we're going to crack on now, actually, because it's past the time that we said we would start. And I know we had, I think 15 or 20 people booked on, we were expecting, but we'll just keep going. And hopefully by the time I've done my introduction, everyone will have joined, so they won't have missed anything important. I just wanted to, before we kick on to the main content, just to welcome everybody to today's session looking at air quality. My name is Ned Harris and I work at Suffolk County Council on the Business Energy Efficiency Anglia project, who are supporting this webinar today and funded by ERDF. And I work through the Carbon Charter, and we run this webinar through the Carbon Charter Network, which is an association of businesses in Suffolk and Norfolk and beyond, who are all working to the shared goal of getting our region towards net zero as part of the climate crisis. So we run a number of events and provide support very much in that context, and all the information is available on our website at carboncharter.org. That's why I'm delighted that actually this is a bit of a breakout for us, I think, because I don't think we've covered air quality directly before. And today is, of course, Air Quality Day. And we tend to be focused on the climate crisis side of things, but there are many related issues around there. Air quality, of course, has many of the same causes. I'm not going to try and steal Alicia's thunder, I'm sure she'll be coming to that, but many of the fossil fuel burning and transport issues cut across both areas. So it's a way of sort of benefiting on two fronts. And of course, I guess an interesting thing from my perspective, I tend to work in energy and carbon and climate change. An interesting thing about air quality is that where climate change is a local contribution to a global problem, which then has local impacts, air quality it's a local problem. You know, the whole thing is sort of there, so you can tackle it there and see an immediate impact. So very much looking forward to this, to hear about Alicia Scully. Delighted to have you here. Joins us from West Suffolk to talk about their programme of support for businesses around air quality. Alicia, over to you.
Great, thank you, Ned. Yeah, I would just try and share my screen. Okay. Oh, I'm not sure it likes it. You might have to try again. Yeah, Peter, do you want to share for me? It's not coming up. If you
just while Peter's doing that, can I put you on the spot and check that you're happy to hang around afterwards and answer a few questions if there are?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I mean, if there's any burning questions whilst I go along, happy to be interrupted if it's about what I'm talking about. But otherwise, yeah, we'll have plenty of time afterwards for all questions.
Great, thank you.
Peter, are you okay to share the slides for me?
Certainly am. Bear with me a second.
Okay, no worries. Perfect. Yeah, so as Ned said, I'm from West Suffolk Council, and yeah, we just wanted to raise some awareness of air quality today on Clean Air Day, and talk about kind of what the problem is, which is kind of the first section of this, which might be a little bit doom and gloom, but as Ned said, it is a local problem. It's got local sources and has local solutions. So it is actually something we can do something about on a local level. So that's really great. And we'll talk about why it's important to your business and what you can do. So can I have the next slide, please, Peter? Thank you. So yeah, why is it a problem? It's a public health emergency. 40,000 deaths every year in the UK are linked to air pollution. It also causes 2.7 billion of loss to the UK economy, and a good chunk of that is due to the sick leave that your employees take because of they've got these air pollution related illnesses. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the pollutants that are of concern in this country are nitrogen dioxide, particulate matter, organic compounds, carbon monoxide and ozone, and I'll talk more about some of those later on. but they all have very similar health impacts. So what you might have heard of the long term, kind of obviously lung conditions, heart conditions, but they also have some short term effects, so reduced concentration and headaches. So having good air quality for your employees might, have a more short term direct impact on your business and how effective they are at work. How we're affected by air pollution does vary according to a number of factors. So is the individual kind of susceptible? Maybe they already have some pre-existing conditions, and air quality can make them worse. Also, if people are younger, so children or older, people who are pregnant, they can be affected by air quality more severely. It's also impacted by the concentration of the pollutant, how long you're exposed to it, and they can also have cumulative effects. So if there's more than one pollutant, that can have a worse effect. Next slide, please. So we have a range of sources, and they come from both inside and outside a building. So a lot of normal activity, traffic, industrial construction, and also everyday things we have inside our buildings, from cleaning products, smoke, all kinds of things. Next slide, please. So some more examples. So combustion processes, pets, decor, furnishing, cooking, demolition, construction, fires. So just to give you an idea of the types of sources and the scale of the issue. Next slide, please. So when we're thinking about air quality, we think through a hierarchy in terms of what we can do about it. So the first step is always, can we remove the source? If we can't completely remove it, can we reduce the emissions that that source gives off? If not, can we disrupt the pathway, so how it gets from the source to the receptors, so that's the people or the environment? If we can't do that, can we protect the people? And if we can't do that, can we remove the people from the situation? So we'll go into some examples now. So we can, the next slide, please. So the first pollutant is nitrogen dioxide. So the sources of it's produced in combustion. Okay, so the big one for us is road transport, but also if you've got gas heating or gas cooking, they're quite big sources of nitrogen dioxide as well, particularly where your heating isn't well fluid or ventilated. Then we can get nitrogen dioxide indoors. So if we think about that hierarchy, first step is get rid of the source. So if you switch to an electric vehicle, that would be brilliant. You get rid of the source. Obviously, that might not be right for everyone at the moment. So the next step is, can you reduce emissions? So if you switch from a diesel to a petrol car, that will reduce your nitrogen dioxide. And again, if you buy a newer car, they're getting better in terms of the emissions. So it'll be a lower emissions. And then again, you might be able to disrupt the pathway. And change how it gets to the people. So if you're indoors cooking, having good ventilation, you're stopping it reaching the people. So that's a good way to think about it. Next slide, please. So our next pollutant is particulate matter. So particulate matter is a complex mixture of solid and liquid particles that suspend in the air. So we're talking about really small particles. So that diagram there, so we have particulate matter 10, PM10, which is less than 10 microns in diameter. So you can see that quite a few of those would fit into the width of a human hair or a grain of sand. So very small particles such as dust, pollen and mold. And then even worse is PM 2.5, which is even smaller, organic compounds, metals. And these are bad for us because they're so small. When you breathe them in, they can get quite deep into your lungs. So the sources of these are brake and tyre wear, construction and demolition. We also have some natural particulate matter in terms of kind of dust from the Sahara Desert. And then internally, kind of renovation works, cooking, particularly frying, smoking, burning candles, and then also things like clothing and carpets release kind of particles and small fibers into the air. Another big one is wood burning stoves and fires. These release a lot of particulate matter. The way to reduce that is making sure you buy certified wood. So there's a scheme called Ready to Burn from Woodshaw. And what that is just a standard that you're using very dry logs. So there's less moisture content and it will give off less pollution. Next slide, please. So volatile organic compounds. So these are, as it says, volatile chemicals, and they can have a long life, so they'll emit over weeks or years. They're in quite a lot of things, particularly indoors, so surface treatments, things like timber preservation or coatings, paints, adhesive sealants. But also more day-to-day things, so cleaning products, air fresheners, any other aerosols, cooking, plug-in air fragrances, they're all releasing these VOCs. And you can also get some from road traffic. So if we think back to that hierarchy, so take cleaning products, you can buy products that do not have these in. So if you look at your household cleaning products, a lot of the standard ones, if you read the warnings on the back, it will say do not breathe spray, and that's because of these VOCs. So there are some kind of brands that are kind of eco-friendly and advertise as such, and you can look on the back and they won't have that warning. So that's one thing, is to remove the source. Reducing emissions, reduce how you use it, and changing the pathway. So for example, if you're cleaning, if you spray at a distance to a surface, you're spraying into the air as well, and you're losing some of that chemical to the air. Whereas if you spray on a cloth first and then clean, you're not losing as much chemical to the air, so you're not breathing it in, and also you're not wasting it either. So that's quite good. In terms of paint, you do get paints that will say on the label low VOCs, which are obviously better, have less emissions, and ventilation is, to remove that pathway and remove the emissions in the room is really important for paint. Okay, next slide, please. So carbon monoxide emitted during inefficient combustion. So things that poorly maintained or poorly ventilated gas heaters and cookers are the main source. And smoking, burning candles also gives off a small amount. So for carbon monoxide, it's really making sure you got proper maintenance regimes in on your gas appliances, which I'm sure we know anyway. Okay, next slide, please. So ozone. So when we have nitrogen dioxide from road traffic, when it's sunny, that breaks down and produces ozone. So that's one of the biggest sources of ozone, but also we have some indoor sources such as printers and some air cleaning appliances. The main tactic for dealing with ozone really is to make sure you have good ventilation and modern appliances. So that's our main pollutants and just some things to think about in terms of sources and what you can do. I'm now going to go into a couple of more specific actions that easy actions you can take that will have a big impact. So can I get the next slide, please? So we talked about nitrogen dioxide from vehicles. Obviously, if you can get an EV, great. If you can't, yeah, one of the biggest things you can do is not idle your engine. So this is when you leave your engine running while stationary. So it's actually illegal to roadside idle. You can get a fine through a fixed penalty notice. But it's also often it's not necessary, and it's just wasteful of your fuel. So your car is producing nitrogen dioxide, and it actually builds up in a very localized area around your car. So in 1 minute, your car will produce enough nitrogen dioxide and other pollutants to fill 150 balloons. So if you imagine the space of 150 balloons, you can see how it quickly builds up next to traffic and cars that are idling. So So the message here is really to cut the engine if you take your break or are waiting in traffic where you know you're going to be sat there for a little while. It's also important to note that pollution is actually going to be worse inside your vehicle when you're on a busy road. So you can see from that image, the exhaust from the vehicle in front is being drawn in through your air vents. So you're actually going to be worse off inside the vehicle. So make sure you turn on your inside air circulation, but also you'd be better off walking. Sometimes people think, oh, I don't want to walk down a busy road, but if you're outside, that air pollution is getting dispersed to the atmosphere. Whereas if you're inside a vehicle, it's kind of concentrating in that small space. So yeah, something to think about with idling. If you want to know more, we've got a video on our YouTube channel that can be used as driver training. Next slide, please. So we've got some myths about idling. So it's one myth is that it might make more pollution to stop and start your engine, but actually if you're idling for more than 60 seconds, that is worse than stop starting. So it's better to turn off and restart. If you're idling in an area where you're not supposed to park on a yellow line or something, some people think, oh, I'm running my engine, it looks like I'm not stopped for long, and therefore I won't get the parking fine. But actually, even if you're running your engine, you can still get the parking ticket and you can be fined for idling as well. So that won't help you. Myth here is idling is keeping me warm. Today I might be more appropriate to write it's keeping me cold. But often if you leave your ignition on but turn your engine off, then your heater and your aircon will still run for a little while. Keep that going. It's also a concern from some people that it might wear your engine out, turning it off and on, but actually it's helping keep your engine clean and avoids wear and tear. If you think about that particulate matter pollution that's coming off of engine and brake and tyre wear, you're not producing that when you're sat still, so it's not building up in your car. Okay, next slide, please. So yeah, we're asking you to pledge to leave your work vehicles off when you're not moving and to switch off when parked. And there's some more information if you want to do that. Okay, next slide, please. So yeah, the next big thing you can do is think about active travel and how your employees commute to work. So 122 million tons of carbon dioxide, that is how much, that's our carbon footprint from domestic transport, most of which is commuting. And 34% of nitrogen oxide emissions come from transport and 13% of particulate matter emissions come from transport. So if we can tackle the transport, actually we can get a really big chunk of air pollution sorted. As a local authority, we measure nitrogen dioxide levels all around our district, as do all other local authorities. And our hotspots of where pollution is bad is where we get traffic building up. So, anywhere where traffic is building up before a junction or lights and people are idling their engines, that's where the worst pollution is in our area. So 42% of commuters could walk or cycle to work, but currently only 15% do. And same with public transport, 46% of people could get to work using public transport, but only 18% do. So there is a lot more scope to improve our active travel. Obviously, there's a small percentage that can't do either of those. And that's not much we can do right now, but there is a good chunk that we can influence. So my suggestion would be conduct a travel survey of your employees, find out how they travel to work, and then we can look at how we can encourage them and give them confidence to travel with a different method. Next slide, please. So these are some suggestions of the easy things you can do to help people. So simply providing information on the travel options, particularly when people join your company, giving them information on the good walking routes, good cycle routes, public transport, and just making sure they've got all the information. Also kind of increasing confidence for people to cycle, things like providing bike maintenance sessions so they know confident they can fix their bike if something goes wrong, and also just providing facilities, bike storage and showers, so people can cycle to work. And also just a lot of promotion and awareness is really helpful. So promoting walk to work week or car free day, promoting clean air walking routes so people can find nice routes to walk to work, or running a challenge, like a pedometer challenge, to encourage people to get walking more. Obviously, one of the best things, especially that come out of COVID, is a lot more working from home, which is absolutely great. I think there's still a lot we can do on active travel. People still may be coming in, even if it's just a couple of days a week, getting them to travel actively. And then often in their personal life, they will start doing it more as well once people get into the habit of cycling or walking for those shorter journeys. Okay, next slide, please. So today in West Suffolk, we're launching the Clean Air Business Scheme. So for taking some of these actions, you can get accreditation, so bronze, silver, gold, or platinum. It's a really flexible scheme. You've got all of those choices, so over 100 choices about what actions you take, so it can suit your business. For the bronze scheme, I think you've got to do a total of about 15 actions. And I suspect, especially if you're on carbon charter, as Ned said, a lot of things are similar. If you're doing something for carbon, you might have also had an air quality benefit. So you might already be doing some of these. So I'd say bronze is quite achievable, and obviously it gets harder for each level. And we can offer support and advice on how to improve air quality and work on active travel. So if you're interested, you can email the way to go Suffolk at suffolk.gov.uk. So that's in West Suffolk, we're trialling the Clean Air Business Scheme. And then across Suffolk, you can get support for improving your active travel of employees. Next slide, please. Yeah, there you go. That is the email address, and I'm always happy to take any air quality questions as well. Okay, I think that's it, Ned.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Really, yeah, I mean, I feel like I learned a lot. I feel there's things that I ought to have known there, but it's great to see it all put together like that. If anybody has any questions, if you want to put them in the Q&A, using the button along in the bar along the bottom. You can also raise your hand if you want to ask the question, but I just warn you that we had some slight gremlins at the start of this, so I'm volunteering Peter, our helpful admin there, to try and enable people to speak. But if that proves to be a problem, then we may just do it through the Q&A if you want to put any questions in there. And just, I've had a question from somebody who wasn't able to make it, which I'm going to just jump up to the top of the queue. I see we've got a couple of questions already, but they've asked about how, as a business, how would I know my air quality impacts and which things I should prioritize to do it on? Which I guess is interesting for me because, you know, we would always talk about doing a footprint in carbon, and it all comes down to carbon, but air quality, it's sort of different particulates, and I'm guessing that there isn't that kind of way of common bunching them all together as one number.
Yes, I think it's quite difficult to get an exact number, same as you would for carbon. I think it's if you can do a measure, and everyone can look up on their local authority website what the local nitrogen dioxide levels are. We've got lots of different tubes monitoring these, so you can look up a location near you and see what it's like. And we know which things like cars, you know, that's going to be a big source. but I guess it's hard to attribute what the local air pollution is and how much of that your business personally is responsible, or as an individual is personally responsible. And again, there's more. Nitrogen dioxide is the biggest one at the moment, but there are all these other ones as well. So it's not just one thing to account for either. So it's quite difficult is the answer. I think the way to do it is kind of do an audit of the sources and work out, how many sources have you got and what you can do about each one. So thinking about cars, thinking about vehicles, thinking about heating, both how efficient your heating is, what type it is, and how efficient it is around the building. And then you can do an indoor air quality audit. So looking around at just doing an assessment of what all your sources may be inside your buildings, and then looking to work on that. But in terms of, I don't think there is a way you can just get a figure equivalent to a carbon footprint. Not yet, anyway. Someone might come up with a good way of doing it.
I mean, yeah, thank you. Yeah, well, and I guess, and we would say the same thing with the carbon footprint as well, that there's a trade-off between, it's important to understand where your major impacts are and you want to know that, but also quite often, I mean, I'm guessing with this, often if you using a lot of vehicles, then that's the area, you can sort of identify the key areas to act on without knowing that.
Yeah.
I see we've got a hand up from Charles Croydon. I don't know, Peter, whether you can facilitate that or whether that relates to the question in the chat. I think Peter's word is magic.
Yes, so my question in the chat is about enforcement, which, I mean, there are minor details, Alicia, that Rule 123 of the Highway Code looks at a 2-minute duration before enforcement action. But enforcement is weak, and it's difficult to find examples of good enforcement. So, for example, in New York City, the fine is $1,000, and the person who reports the crime gets half of that. So there is greater enforcement from the public, but I haven't found any great political traction, I suppose is the word, amongst the Ipswich Borough councillors to go down that route. Have you come across better enforcement measures, or are you finding there's a lot of enforcement?
I don't think there is much enforcement. Certainly in West Suffolk, we've trialled different ways of doing this, including, because one of the issues is awareness. Most people don't know it's illegal, so then it does become hard to enforce. And so, there's been some trials of what's the best way to get people to stop idling. So the way we've currently landed on in West Suffolk is that our civil enforcement officers will just talk to people and try and use the education angle rather than the fines angle. And most people don't realise it's a problem. And haven't really thought about what they're doing. So that's quite effective. Actually, one of the best ways we've found is idling can be a problem outside schools, so people are picking up and dropping off. And we found the best way to tackle that is to work with the children, educate them, and then get them to go outside and talk to the parents idling outside. And they turn off pretty quickly then when a child is telling them what the problem is. And they tend to listen to that quite well. So that's quite effective. But enforcement depends on where you are and may change. Obviously, London probably does the most enforcement, but each area can decide how they tackle it. So it is variable across the country.
Great, thank you.
Hope that answers your question.
I like the idea of children getting the children on board as well as the direct beneficiaries of it. I think is powerful. Excellent. Thank you very much for that. I did have one other question is around, I guess this is a legacy of COVID thing, that more people are working from home, whether to what extent businesses should be responsible for the air quality of people working at home. Is that something that you would are supporting businesses to communicate with their employees on?
I guess that's exactly the same issue with carbon, isn't it? When you're doing your carbon footprint, now businesses are trying to work out how do we, maybe we're using less in the office because we have less people there, or we've got a smaller office, but how do you account for the energy usage and the carbon from everyone individually heating or cooling their homes? And yeah, it's exactly the same issue, and I'm not sure we have an answer for it yet. Um, I guess at the moment it's probably just awareness raising, making people think of these issues and the air pollution sources they may have in or around their homes. Um, I don't think we have a good answer for it yet.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's you know, it's been a very sudden change, and I think a lot of people are still grappling with that. But it's you know.
Yeah, and exactly, and you know, one of the best things that's happened is people not traveling as much. So in the COVID lockdowns in West Suffolk, the air quality dropped 45%. Nitrogen dioxide levels dropped 45%. So you can see how much traffic is responsible for it. And we've seen that benefit stay since then. It hasn't risen to pre-COVID levels. So that's definitely one of the best things. But as you say, people are heating their homes individually rather than just one office being heated. So pros and cons.
And I mean, you could see it. Was this just psychological? I don't know. Certainly in the first few weeks of lockdown, when the roads were very empty and I was cycling, it felt that, you know, the air smelt better and you could see further and things just looked sort of crisper.
Yeah, I think, air quality is a very direct impact, and you know, it's here and now is the effect. So if you get bad days and good days, so for example, if you get a really windy day, actually that air pollution disperses pretty quickly, so the air that you're breathing in is be much cleaner. Whereas if you've got a still day, there'll be higher levels of pollution. And again, you know, if you're in a busy road, the pollution is highest, you know, in rush hour, and then in the middle of the day, you know, it does disperse. So it's a direct impact.
Excellent, thank you. So I'm not seeing any other questions at the moment, but do raise them if you want to. Otherwise, so I might just sort of wrap up with a final question for you, Alicia, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course.
Unless any others come through while we're doing that. So yeah, I mean, I think it was striking how much of this, you know, you talk about it as an air quality issue, we talk about climate change, but it's doing the same thing. It's another reason to do the same thing. Very often active travel and not idling and not wasting energy and so on, and all of these are the key things. So I guess there's a question then around air quality for it's an issue that we face a lot around energy use and carbon, which is what are the big barriers for businesses, do you think? What are the issues that they come up against, and I guess what are the things that we should be looking at to support with that?
I think the biggest barrier with air quality is it's just not something that is at the front of people's mind. It's not something people are always aware of. And I think it's just something, you know, along with carbon that should be considered when making decisions, when, you know, making amendments to your building, or, you know, have you got adequate ventilation that comes from a clean source, so you're not ventilating onto a busy road, as that, you know, that won't help you. And just, you know, all the decisions you make about, you know, what heating you have, what transport you have, consider all the options and consider the air quality impact as well as the carbon impact and financial and all the other things you normally think about. So for example, even if you get an electric van, that will still have the brake and tyre wear particulate matter pollution. So it's not solving it completely. Whereas if you potentially went for electric cargo bike to do the last bits of deliveries, that could be even better. So it's just thinking about all aspects of what you're doing and all the various impacts which aren't limited to carbon.
Yeah, that's very much.
And in terms of how we can help, we're always happy to help with advice, and we're trying to raise more awareness so people can understand the issue.
That's great, thank you. And so a question from Karen in the chat. This is an interesting one, actually. been on, I've done community air quality testing on busy roads around me to try and demonstrate things, but there's a question there is, how accurate are they? How worthwhile do you think that process is? Can you identify sort of particularly bad areas that way?
So the way we measure air quality as an authority is we do nitrogen dioxide with diffusion tubes. They're just small tubes that we put up on kind of lampposts next to busy roads. And we change them every month and send them to a lab, but we calculate the results from a whole year. So it's an annual measure because, as I said, the weather has a huge impact. So if you have a windy month, that month will be less than if you have a sunny month. So it varies, and you get all these variations due to time of day, exactly, what the traffic is that day. There's so many factors that affect it that you've actually just got to step back a little wider and look at the annual average. And we also adjust that based on some expensive high quality sensors. So you can get ones that measure, every minute. They are very expensive. And obviously only give you that exact location. So we compare, all the authorities compare the results to each other, and we compare to these fixed site sensors to make sure we're adjusting for any kind of biases that may result from that process. So there's a lot to do to check the data is accurate, and we have to step back and do that annual perspective to get a good measurement, so that we're not just looking at weather and very small impacts. So you can buy these sensors. I think good quality ones are extremely expensive, and obviously they only are that exact location. So you'd have to think about where you've got them. And all our data is available on our website. So if you look up your local authority website, you can find the kind of tubes, test points nearest to you, and see what the levels are like. Yeah.
Excellent, thank you. And this possibly has to be a final question, I think, but actually it's a question I was going to ask and then decided not to, but there's a topic there that I didn't know that we wanted to get into, but Charles has raised it in the chat and put your hand up. So I don't know whether that is they come back to the whether there's an impact from leaving the EU, which has obviously been central to some of this. I mean, we used to get those annual reports about the UK breaking EU air quality legislation in some areas, and is that changing the picture if that pressure is being removed?
I don't think it's having too much of an effect, because the World Health Organization sets the standards. So that's what we went off before, and that's the targets we use now. We have some localized areas where air quality isn't that great. So when we find areas that are above the standards, we have what's called an air quality management area. And we look at the exact issues in that area, what's causing the pollution, and we make changes. So for example, in Great Barton in West Suffolk, there was a particular stretch of road which has got buildings, so it's a bit of a canyon effect because the pollution gets trapped between the buildings and a high wall the other side. And there was a crossing there. There was a traffic light crossing, so the cars were traffic building up behind it and then accelerating away. So it was a lot of pollution being produced in that area. So we moved the crossing further up the road where it was more open and where it wasn't in front of some houses. So when we say there are locations that are breaching those EU standards, I think that's what's being talked about, where we found areas. But whenever we have found an area, we implement these air quality management areas, and that's what every local authority does. And we're slowly improving them, and then we can revoke the management areas. So, and as I said, COVID has helped massively. People, and it's always getting better. People buying cleaner cars and EVs, so it's improving all the time. And then once we've got 3 years of data that are below these standards, then we can take those management areas away.
Lovely, thank you. Charles, has that your hand gone up again? Do you want a final question and then we will wrap this
Yes,
up?
Elisa, you haven't answered the question. So if I just give you some examples. For example, in Ipswich, there was a park and ride scheme that the income from the bus tickets didn't cover the cost of the bus, and no account was taken of the health costs, the cost of bills, businesses from absenteeism, the damage to houses, the paint that householders then had to pay for. So again, in Ipswich, there's a scheme, proposed scheme for a large multi-storey car park. And again, these costs on the health system and on the businesses don't seem to be taken into account. So what figures are you using when you consider planning applications in pence per mile per vehicle?
So when we consider planning applications, if they're large schemes, they'll have to do an assessment to show what impact they'll have on the air quality. But that is for the larger schemes. So if we get a lot of small developments, the cumulative impact will be missed. But with all those larger schemes, which should be the biggest chunk of the air quality impact, they do have to prove what their impact will be, as particularly considering from a highways perspective. They have to show what public transport links and what active travel routes there will be for like new residents and how they'll be able to get from the estate. So I think it's good consideration now in terms of they have to making sure they are doing something and making sure there is an option for people other than just to drive. We don't have a pence figure to do a calculation of what the actual impacts will be on businesses. I think it's important to consider air quality and making sure it is considered in decisions, making sure we raise awareness. And as I say, it's definitely done so on the biggest sites, and is considered on things like park and ride and whether it's suitable. I think that's what I've got to say to that one. So yeah.
Great. Thank you, Alicia. Thank you very much indeed for your time. We will just wrap it up there. Thank you everybody for joining us. I think that the recording will be available on our website if anybody wants to share this with anyone else or review anything that was raised, and we can share the information from the slides, Alicia, as well. You're happy for that to go out?
Yes, of course. Yeah, happy to share the slides.
So I just wanted to flag 2 upcoming events then, the first of which is highly relevant to this conversation is the 22nd of June, so that's next Wednesday, is the EV Experience Day, with all sorts of exciting electric vehicles to talk to people about and try out driving around Trinity Park, so get an experience of what the latest electric vehicles are. And for Carbon Charter members, there is a discount on the ticket price of that event as well. And then on the 6th of July in Broome on the Suffolk-Norfolk border is our annual summer showpiece event for the Carbon Charter and Business Network, but open to all businesses as long as there are spaces available, which there are still at the moment, some spaces. And is an opportunity to network with other businesses and find out a bit more about the context of our work towards net zero and other such joys. So yes, we hope to see you there. Thank you very much for joining us today. And do get in touch if anybody has any suggestions or requests for future topics. So thank you for joining us. Thank you, Peter, for setting up. And thank you very much, Alicia, for your time.
Thank you.